Somewhere in the middle of a Japanese summer, when the air sits so heavy it bends the light and the world outside the zoo walls dissolves into white heat, a 7-month-old monkey is sitting alone on a concrete ledge, holding a stuffed toy the way a shipwrecked sailor holds the last floating plank. He doesn't know he's being watched. He doesn't know that somewhere across the world, strangers are crying over a 30-second video of him. He doesn't know any of that. He only knows the toy, the weight of it, the softness of it, the way it doesn't pull away. His name is Punch, and this is not just the story of an abandoned monkey. This is the story of what happens when a living creature loses the first architecture of its mind, the blueprint it was supposed to receive in the earliest, most sacred weeks of life, and has to rebuild itself from scratch, in public, surrounded by 60 strangers who speak a language he was never taught. Let's start before the abandonment, before the heat, before the toy. Imagine being born into a dynasty. Not a human dynasty of crowns and thrones, but something older, something that has been running without interruption for roughly 25 million years. Japanese macaques, the species to which Punch belongs, have developed one of the most complex and layered social structures in the entire primate world. Researchers call it a matrilineal hierarchy. But that cold, technical phrase does no justice to the living, breathing empire it actually describes. Think of it this way. Every troop of macaques is a vertical universe, and position within that universe is not random. It is inherited. It is enforced. It is negotiated daily through 1,000 tiny gestures, glances, postures, and silences. When one monkey grooms another, that act is not about cleanliness. It is a currency, a declaration, a political statement older than any government humans have ever built. The infant that is born into this world is not simply born, it is inducted. Immediately and continuously, from the first hour of life, the mother begins transmitting a survival manual written in touch, in presence, in the specific weight of a body held against another body. She teaches boundaries through the correction of small mistakes. She teaches hierarchy through the way she defers or does not defer to the macaques who pass by. She teaches trust through the monotonous, meditative ritual of grooming, that slow, deliberate sorting through fur that looks gentle from the outside but carries the full weight of social law. Without this transmission, an infant macaque does not simply miss information, it misses the operating system itself. The summer heat that year in Ichikawa City was not the soft warmth of photographs. It was metabolic violence, the kind of heat that disrupts biological rhythms evolved over millions of years, that pushes hormones off their rails and drives animals into behaviors their nervous systems were not prepared to manage. Punch was 7 months old, still in the window of maximum developmental sensitivity, still at the precise moment when neural pathways for social learning are being carved into the brain with the urgency of rivers cutting through new rock. And his mother abandoned him. What followed was a decision by zoo staff that was equal parts compassion and complexity. They took Punch in. They kept him warm, fed, and alive. They gave him what human hands could give. And then, because they understood that an infant macaque needs physical contact the way it needs oxygen, they gave him the toy. It was a simple plush figure, unremarkable to human eyes, but to Punch it became something closer to a foundation. He held it against his chest with the specific, desperate grip that infant macaques reserve for their mothers, the grip that evolution designed for a living body that moves and breathes and stays. The toy did not move, it did not breathe, but it stayed. and for a creature whose only experience of abandonment was a living thing that left, something that could not leave was a revelation. Scientists who study early primate development have a term for the critical period Punch was moving through. They call it the sensitive window for social attachment, a span of months where the brain is, in neurological terms, soaking wet with plasticity, ready to absorb and encode the social world around it with an efficiency it will never again possess. Miss this window, and the neural architecture for reading social cues, for understanding hierarchy and reciprocity and conflict resolution, does not develop the way it was designed to. It develops around the gap, the way a tree grows around a wound, compensating, but never quite whole. Punch was living inside that gap.
Monkey Mountain at Ichikawa City Zoo is not a mountain in any geological sense, but as a social landscape, it is Everest. 60 macaques, each carrying their own rank, their own alliances, their own grudges and loyalties accumulated across years of daily negotiation. A vertical universe, fully operational, with rules enforced through gesture and silence and the precise choreography of who sits near whom. Into this universe, the keepers introduced Punch. Imagine being dropped into a court where everyone speaks a language you have never heard, where every gesture carries legal weight, where the wrong posture at the wrong moment can trigger consequences ranging from a glare to a physical correction, and you have no map, no translator, no guide. Punch had none of those things. What he had was the toy. He carried it onto Monkey Mountain the way a child carries a security blanket into the first day of school, pressed against his chest, draped over his arms. The other macaques observed him with the flat, evaluative attention of beings who are always reading, always assessing, always updating their social calculations. And what they read in Punch was wrong. Not wrong in a moral sense, wrong in the way that a frequency played off-key is wrong. He approached without the correct submissive postures. He engaged with the social pre-negotiation that macaque culture demands before physical contact. He moved through the group with the unearned confidence of an infant who had never learned that confidence must be borrowed before it can be owned. The corrections came. Not brutal, but clear. A shove, a display, a deliberate turning away that in macaque society is not rudeness, but communication. The message was consistent. You do not yet know the rules, and until you do, you are outside. He sat alone. He held the toy. He watched. And here is what scientists observing this situation found remarkable. Something that cut against every assumption about rejected and developmentally compromised primates. Punch did not stop trying. Despite repeated corrections, despite isolation, despite the repeated and unambiguous message that he did not yet belong, he kept approaching. He kept attempting engagement. He kept showing up at the edge of social interactions, toy pressed to his chest, watching with those dark eyes for any crack in the wall. Resilience in biology is not a personality trait, it is a survival technology, and in Punch, it was running at full capacity. The videos reached the internet the way all genuinely moving things do, without warning, without announcement, carried on the invisible currents of human emotional recognition. A small monkey sitting alone on a concrete surface, holding a plush toy, surrounded by 60 others who were engaged with each other in the ordinary, magnificent complexity of macaque social life. Something about the image was almost unbearably precise in what it communicated. Not just loneliness, not just cuteness, something harder to name. The longing of a creature at the exact boundary between belonging and exile, close enough to see the thing it needed, not yet equipped to reach it. Zoo visitor numbers climbed. People came from across Japan and beyond to see Punch. They stood at the barriers and watched him hold his toy and make his small, persistent attempts at connection. Many of them cried. Some brought offerings that could not be accepted. All of them, in some wordless way, recognized something.
Because here is what Punch was living that every human being also knows: the experience of being inside a social world whose rules you have not yet mastered, the particular pain of trying and being turned away, the instinct, deep and irrational and magnificent, to try again anyway. Anne Sing had been on Monkey Mountain for years. She was not the alpha female. She was not at the apex of the dynasty, but in macaque terms, she was established, her position stable, her social capital real and recognized. She had the confidence of an animal that knows exactly where it stands and does not need to prove it through aggression. What she did next, scientists who study macaque behavior will tell you, is not strictly explainable through the lens of genetic self-interest alone. She had no biological relationship to Punch. He offered her no clear advantage. His presence in the group had, if anything, been a minor social irritant, a disruption to the smooth operation of the hierarchy he kept misreading. She approached him anyway. The moment was not dramatic in the way that human drama tends to be. There was no sound that carried across the mountain, no visible shift in the behavior of the surrounding group. Anne Sing simply moved to where Punch was sitting, alone with his toy, and she put her arms around him. She embraced him, and then she groomed him. In macaque culture, grooming is not a casual act. It is a declaration. It is the physical enactment of acceptance, the statement that this body is worth the time and attention of my hands, that this creature is inside my circle of care. To groom a socially rejected juvenile is to stake social capital on an investment that most members of the group had silently agreed was not worth making. Anne Sing made it anyway. Punch went still, the kind of stillness that is not passivity, but reception, the full, open stillness of a body finally receiving what it was designed to receive. His grip on the toy loosened, fractionally, the way a held breath releases. What happened next unfolded not in a single dramatic reversal, but in the slow, tidal rhythm that real social change moves through. Anne Sing stayed near Punch, not constantly, not obsessively, but with the specific, deliberate consistency of a macaque who has made a decision and is communicating it to the group through the grammar of proximity.
And the group began to read it. In macaque society, social signals are not interpreted individually. They are read relationally. When a high-status adult female maintains proximity to a rejected juvenile, that proximity is information. It is data being broadcast to every member of the troop, updating their social calculations, shifting the cost-benefit analysis of engaging with or excluding Punch. Other macaques began to approach, tentatively at first, the way you test ice before putting your full weight on it. A brief groom here, a moment of parallel resting there. The corrections became less frequent. The deliberate exclusions became less pointed. The mountain was slowly, incrementally, reluctantly opening. Punch began to change too. The neurological explanation for what happened is found in what researchers call experience-dependent plasticity, the brain's remarkable and humbling capacity to continue developing in response to experience, even after the sensitive window has technically closed. The intense, sustained, positive social engagement he began receiving from Anne Sing and slowly from the broader group was not simply pleasant, it was developmental. It was carving new pathways into a brain that had grown around absence, creating late but genuine architecture for the social skills he had missed. He began to understand boundaries in practice rather than theory. He learned to read the postures, the glances, the specific tensions in a macaque body that signaled the boundary between welcome and warning. He learned through repetition and correction, and the occasional shove, where the lines were drawn in this particular dynasty of 60. He began to hold the toy less. Not dramatically, not all at once, but measurably. The grip that had been constant, the pressing of the plush figure against his chest with that infant strength that researchers recognize as a displacement behavior, a consolation for what should have been a living body, began to soften.
There were hours now when the toy sat nearby but was not being held. There were moments when Punch moved through the group with his hands empty, his attention outward rather than inward. He was learning to trust that the world would not always leave. Here is something that the viral videos and the surge of zoo visitors did not fully capture, something that sits in the background of this story like a tectonic truth. The thing that saved Punch was not human intervention, though the keepers who hand-raised him certainly saved his life. It was not the toy, though the toy held him together through the months when nothing else could. It was not even An Sing alone, though her embrace was the hinge on which everything turned. What saved Punch was the specific, ancient, irreplaceable technology of primate social contact, the thing that evolution spent 25 million years building into the macaque nervous system. The knowledge, encoded not in neurons but in the whole body, that to be held by another living creature is not comfort, it is information, it is instruction, it is the original classroom, older than language, older than tools, older than any human civilization. The toy could not teach that. Human hands could not fully replicate it. Only another macaque, carrying in every gesture the accumulated social grammar of the species, could transmit it. An Sing was not just being kind, she was being a living library, and Punch, sitting still in her arms, was reading. There is a misconception that runs through a lot of popular thinking about animal social behavior. The idea that social skills are innate, that animals are born knowing how to be their species, that the complex choreography of macaque hierarchy is hardwired rather than learned. Scientists for much of the 20th century leaned toward this view. They were wrong. The research that emerged from studying macaques like Punch, and before him, the foundational work of researchers who examined what happened to infant macaques raised in isolation, demolished this assumption with the blunt force of actual evidence. Social competence in primates is not delivered at birth. It is assembled painstakingly through years of lived experience inside a functioning social group, guided by the patient, involuntary instruction of a mother who teaches by simply being present and by being a member of the world her infant needs to join. Remove the mother, remove the social embedding, and you do not get a fully formed macaque who is simply lonely. You get a macaque who is genuinely, neurologically, developmentally incomplete. Not broken, not hopeless, but incomplete, carrying a gap where the foundation should have been. This is what Punch was, and this is why his recovery was not simply emotional, it was biological. It was the brain doing something extraordinary under conditions it was not designed for, reaching for developmental nutrients that arrived late, metabolizing them urgently, building in months what should have taken years. The fact that it worked at all is staggering. The fact that it required An Sing and the slow hospitality of a 60-member troupe to make it work is humbling. The last images from Monkey Mountain tell a different story than the first ones. There is still a small macaque who is sometimes quieter than the others, who still occasionally seeks the periphery rather than the center. The early months leave their mark. Neuroscience is unambiguous about this. The architecture built late is real, but it is not identical to the architecture built on time. But there is also a macaque who grooms and is groomed, who navigates the hierarchy with growing fluency, who approaches other members of the troupe and is not always turned away, who sits sometimes with his hands empty, watching the ordinary, extraordinary social life of his species with the focused attention of someone who is finally, genuinely learning the language. The toy is still around. He goes back to it sometimes. Maybe he always will. There is no shame in that. It held him when nothing else could. It was the first loyalty he ever experienced. You do not simply leave that behind. But it is no longer the center of gravity. An Sing is. The troupe is. The slow, hard-won knowledge that the world contains creatures who will stay is. Punch will never know what An Sing gave him in that moment of embrace. He will not carry it the way a human would, as a named memory, as a story he tells himself about the day everything changed. It will live in him the way all the deepest things live, below language, in the body itself, in the specific warmth of being held by a living thing, in the neural pathways that groomed themselves into existence because one adult female decided that this small, lost, toy-clutching juvenile was worth the investment of her arms. She rewrote his biology with an embrace. And somewhere in that fact, if you sit with it long enough, there is something that reaches beyond macaques and zoo enclosures and Japanese summers. Something about what it costs to be a social creature who is denied the society they were built for. Something about the gap that forms in the center of an animal, any animal, when the earliest contact is withdrawn. And something about the extraordinary, almost unreasonable power of one gesture of inclusion to begin filling that gap. We built language to describe these things. We built philosophy to examine them. We built literature to carry them from one generation to the next. The macaques built grooming, and for 25 million years it has been enough. The terrifying, beautiful truth of life on this planet is that belonging is not a luxury. It is structural. It is the load-bearing wall of every social nervous system that evolution has ever assembled. Pull it away and the structure does not fall immediately. It compensates, it adapts, it finds a plush toy and holds on with everything it has. But given half a chance, given one outstretched arm from one adult female on one unbearably hot summer afternoon in a zoo in Ichikawa, it will find its way back to what it was always reaching for. It will find its way home.